During the day, the sun moves across the plateau, casting changing shadows that travel slowly across the colonnade. In the morning, dew collects in the channels of the capitals and glistens briefly before evaporating. By noon, the limestone glows almost white, and the carved acanthus leaves cast lacy shadows on the steps. In late afternoon, as light slants from the west, the columns become silhouettes, dark against a sky that turns deeper blue. These patterns of light and darkness emphasize how the temple was designed to interact with the heavens. The structure framed the sky, offering a gateway through which offerings and prayers might ascend. To reach this high terrace, ancient builders quarried and moved stones whose size defies comprehension. Nearby, in a quarry just outside the site, lies a massive block of limestone known to locals as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Partly cut but never transported, it rests in the earth like a sleeping giant, measuring more than 20 meters long and weighing over 1,000 tons. Other megalithic blocks, each weighing hundreds of tons, were carved from the same quarry and somehow hauled to the platform to form the temple's retaining walls. The process would have involved teams of laborers using sledges, rollers, ropes, and perhaps earthen ramps. Imagine the groan of wood under strain, the chanting of workers hauling in unison, the grinding sound of stone against earth. Each block was then precisely fitted with its neighbors, creating courses of stone that have held together for millennia, despite earthquakes and wars. Although we remember the Temple of Jupiter as the grandest building in the complex, it was accompanied by other sanctuaries that have survived in different states. The Temple of Bacchus, smaller but better preserved, still has its roof and interior walls covered with sculpted reliefs of vines, leaves, and mythological scenes. Walking into that shadowed interior, you feel the temperature drop noticeably. The scent of damp stone rises. Your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through narrow windows high above. Your fingertips trace the carved contours of grapes and satyrs. The walls seem to pulsate with stories of revelry and transformation. Nearby, the Temple of Venus stood on a circular plan, dedicated to the goddess of love and beauty. Its foundations remain, hinting at an architectural diversity that once filled the precinct. Across seasons, Baalbek transforms. In spring, red poppies and yellow mustard bloom among fallen stones, creating a contrast between soft petals and hard rock. Bees and butterflies flit among the flowers. Swallows dart under the entablature. In summer, the sun beats down relentlessly, and the smell of warm dust becomes strong. Lizards sun themselves on stone steps. In autumn, rain clouds build over the mountains, and the air carries a scent of wet earth. In winter, snow sometimes dusts the capitals, turning them into white cones. Icicles hang from cornices. Silence deepens. The ruins respond to each season, absorbing the weather and holding memory like a sponge. As you linger at Baalbek in imagination, you may notice how time slows. The sight invites contemplation. A shepherd might cross the field, his flock bleating, their bells tinkling. A child may run between columns, his laughter echoing off stone. A pilgrim might light a candle and place it on a fallen capital, letting the flame flicker in the wind. Each presence, each moment, joins the countless ones that have passed before, layering the ruin with human experience. To stand here is to feel yourself part of a continuum, a witness to both grandeur and fragility. Palmyra did not flourish in isolation. Its prosperity depended on the caravans that crossed the desert, carrying silk, spices, ivory, and incense. Picture a procession of camels stretching to the horizon, each animal laden with bales wrapped in cloth, their hooves sinking into sand. Drivers wearing striped headcloths walk beside them, singing to keep rhythm. At night, the caravans encamp outside the city walls, fires dotting the plain, the smell of cooking flatbread and stewed meat mingling with the desert night. In the morning, they enter through monumental arches, greeted by the noise of markets and the smell of baked bread. Merchants shout in many languages, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and scribes record transactions in cuneiform and Palmyrene script. This swirl of commerce and culture gave the city its distinctive cosmopolitan character. From Palmyra, let the mind drift westward along the Mediterranean coast and then north around the Aegean to a sanctuary where a different kind of journey took place, not the trade of goods, but the seeking of guidance. South of the ancient city of Miletus, near a small village now called Didyme, stood the great sanctuary of Apollo at Didyma. Approach it in imagination along the sacred road from Miletus, a processional way nearly 17 kilometers long, once lined with sculpted lions and griffins. Pilgrims would travel this path in silence or in chant, their footsteps raising dust, the smell of laurel resin filling the air. The road led through groves of sacred trees until on a slight rise the temple appeared a forest of columns rising from a rectangular platform. The archaic temple, built in the 6th century BCE, was a dipteros surrounded by a double colonnade, 21 columns long on its sides and 8 or 9 on its ends, making 112 in total and measuring about 85 by 38 meters. Each column was carved with flutes that caught the light like ripples on water, and the capitals unfurled in spirals of acanthus and palmette. To enter the sanctuary, you descended into a mysterious space. Unlike most temples, the Didymaean central court was open to the sky. A staircase led down between 2 walls into a sunken courtyard. At its heart gushed a sacred spring whose waters were believed to carry the voice of Apollo. The eyes, branchidae, hereditary priests of the site, tended the spring and laurel trees and offered oracles. Suppliants would ask their questions, then wait sometimes for days until the god's response was whispered by a priestess. Imagine the scent of damp earth and laurel, the splash of water, the soft rustle of leaves, and the murmur of anxious voices. The oracular pronouncements guided decisions as momentous as war and as personal as marriage. The sanctuary was a threshold between human confusion and divine insight. This first temple was destroyed in 493 BCE during the Ionian Revolt when Persian troops raided Miletus's territory. Historians recount that the invaders looted the temple's treasures, carried its bronze statue of Apollo off to Ecbatana, and deported the priestly family. Even the sacred spring dried up, as if Apollo himself had withdrawn. For 2 centuries, the sanctuary lay in ruins. Then, after Alexander the Great defeated the Persians, a new temple was begun around 300 BCE by the people of Miletus under Seleucus I. This Hellenistic temple was intended to be the largest in the Greek world, a colossal project that would surpass even the Artemision at Ephesus. Builders laid massive foundations and raised columns almost 20 meters high, each drum hauled by teams of oxen and laborers using sledges and ramps. The new design retained the open-air court at its center, accessible through a pair of long, vaulted passages. Walls around the court were decorated with a sculpted frieze showing swirling motifs, including giant gorgon heads with curling snakes. Fragments of these Medusa heads still lie in the grass today, their eyes staring upward. Construction continued for centuries, yet was never finished. The temple remained perpetually a building site with cranes and winches in place. Even incomplete, it attracted pilgrims who came to consult the oracle and marvel at its scale. The columns, arranged in double ranks, created deep shadows and bright shafts of light. Birds nested on the capitals. Ivy climbed the flutes. The play of sunshine and darkness, of the open sky glimpsed from within an enclosed court, gave the sanctuary a dreamlike quality. You might imagine walking around the base of the columns, fingers touching the cold stone, ears attuned to the echo of your own footsteps. The smell of incense would drift from offerings. The taste of honey cakes eaten by pilgrims would linger on your tongue. At dusk, the surfaces of the columns would warm to a golden glow. At night, the stars reflected in the pool of the spring below. Centuries passed, empires shifted. As Christianity spread through the Roman world, the sanctuary's voice grew faint. By the 4th century CE, oracles were banned, and silence descended on Didyma. Later, the walls were adapted to hold a church. Mosaic floors replaced marble pavements. Icons replaced sculptures. Earthquakes in the 7th and 15th centuries toppled columns and cracked walls. The local population reused some of the stones for houses and fortifications. When travelers visited in the 17th and 18th centuries, they found tumbleweed growing among colossal drums and reported that only a portion of the peristyle still stood. Today, a few massive columns rise into the sky, their flutes worn smooth by weather and by countless hands. Grass grows between foundation stones, swallows build nests in broken capitals. The sacred spring still seeps up through the earth, its water clear and cold. Tourists walk along modern paths, their voices blending with the distant hum of bees. On certain evenings, when the light is right, shadows fall in such a way that you can almost see the rows of columns completed, and the temple's roof returning, as if time were a tide that can flow backward for a moment. Didyma is a reminder that some wonders vanish because the world around them changes. Gods fall silent, springs dry, or beliefs shift, and yet their stones retain whispers of what once was. The great colonnaded street, more than a kilometer long, formed the spine of Palmyra. Walking along its paved surface, you pass under arches where once stood bronze statues of emperors and local dignitaries. Alcoves in the columns held statues of honored citizens, their names inscribed beneath. At one end of the street rose the monumental arch called the Arch of Triumph, framing the view toward the Temple of Bel. At the other end, the agora bustled with vendors selling dates, grains, and textiles. Off the main street, side roads led to private houses with interior courtyards where fountains splashed and palms rustled. The architecture blended Greco-Roman elements with local traditions. Fluted columns and entablatures sat beside palm-shaped capitals and inscriptions featuring camel caravans. Temples to Balshaman and Alat offered spaces for different deities, their walls carved with griffins, eagles, and rosettes. To the west of the city rose tower tombs, tall rectangular structures resembling fortified towers. Families used them as mausolea, stacking the remains of their members in loculi along the walls, sealing each niche with a carved relief of the deceased. Inside the cool chambers, the air smelled of incense and stone. Light filtered in through small windows high up. Some towers had painted ceilings depicting the heavens, creating the sensation of lying beneath a starry sky. Beyond the towers sprawled underground hypogea, elaborately decorated tomb complexes with painted banquets and processions. These tombs remind us that Palmyra's people invested as much in commemorating the dead as in celebrating life. When extremists destroyed Palmyra's monuments, they targeted both the Temple of Bel and the Temple of Balshamin, blowing up their sanctuaries and leaving only fragments. They also demolished the Arch of Triumph that framed the entrance to the city, and used the Roman theater as a stage for executions. The violence shook those who knew the city intimately, and those who had dreamed of visiting. Afterwards, in the stillness, Palmyra's surviving columns stood like sentinels over the empty spaces. Local residents who returned spoke of sweeping the sand from the flagstones, gathering broken fragments, and telling stories of what used to be. The desert is patient. Dunes shift, winds erase footprints, but memory persists. Even in ruin, Palmyra retains its sense of place. The wind hisses through colonnades, making music of its own. A lizard darts across hot stone, disappearing into a crack. The sky above is immense and cloudless, and as the sun sets, shadows lengthen, turning columns into silhouettes. The air cools, the scent of sagebrush rises. Bats flit between arches. If you sit quietly on a fallen block, the city seems to breathe with you, exhaling the stories of traders, priests, queens like Zenobia, who once ruled here. In the mind's quiet, Palmyra becomes less about what is lost and more about what continues. a human capacity to build, to connect, to remember, despite loss. The Bamiyan Valley is a fertile oasis amid high, arid mountains. Fields of wheat and barley ripple in the wind. Apricot and apple trees bloom in spring, their petals drifting like snow. Irrigation channels cut across the valley floor, fed by streams that flow down from snowmelt. Villages consist of mud brick houses with courtyards where women bake bread in tandoor ovens. Children play among goats and chickens. Life here has long coexisted with the monumental Buddhas carved into the cliff face. Farmers plowed fields under their gaze. Shepherds rested in their shade. Travelers prayed before continuing on treacherous journeys. The statues served not only as religious icons, but as landmarks, visible for miles and reassuring to caravans approaching from either direction. Behind the statues, a honeycomb of caves extends deep into the cliff. These caves once housed monks who devoted themselves to meditation and study. Their walls bear frescoes of astonishing beauty. Buddhas seated on lotus thrones surrounded by swirling flames, musicians playing lutes and drums, bodhisattvas with crowns and jewels, and celestial beings riding clouds. Some of these paintings were created using an oil medium, a technique centuries ahead of its use in Europe. Sitting in one of these caves, you can imagine the sound of a chant, the smell of lamp smoke, the feel of cool stone against your back. Outside, the wind whistles past the cliff, carrying with it the sound of distant bells from yak caravans. After the destruction in 2001, the empty niches became symbols of absence. Some proposed reconstructing the statues using modern materials or light projections. Others argued that leaving the niches empty honors both the presence and the loss. Local people have appropriated the spaces in different ways. During festivals, they string colorful banners across the openings and gather to sing and dance. Children climb around the base, playing hide and seek. International conferences have been held in the valley to discuss heritage preservation, bringing visitors from around the world. The debate about whether to rebuild the Buddhas continues, but in the meantime, the valley's daily rhythms go on. As evening falls in Bamiyan, the sky turns a deep cobalt. Stars emerge one by one. The smell of smoke from cooking fires drifts upward. Crickets begin to chirp. In the silence, the dark outlines of the cliffs stand against the sky, and the empty niches look like windows into another world. You might hear a story told by an elder about the time when the statues still stood, about how travelers would bow before them. Those stories are another way of keeping the Buddhas alive. The valley invites such storytelling. Even if you have never been there, you can close your eyes and see the golden light of dawn on sandstone, the slow movement of shadows across carved robes, the way a small boy might look up at a face and smile back. In the mind's eye, the Buddhas rise again, not as stone, but as memory. The urban plan of Mohenjo-daro reveals an attention to detail that feels strikingly modern. Streets run north-south and east-west, intersecting at right angles to create blocks. At regular intervals, narrow lanes branch off, leading to house clusters. Many houses had courtyards open to the sky, providing light and ventilation. Floors were covered with mats or smoothed clay. Walls were plastered and sometimes whitewashed. Some dwellings had multiple rooms, perhaps indicating social stratification. Yet the absence of palaces or grand monuments suggests a relatively egalitarian society. In one part of the city, archaeologists found a large pillared hall with thick brick columns set in sockets, perhaps an assembly hall. The great granary, with its series of brick platforms and air ducts, suggests a communal storage facility that may have served to distribute grain or collect taxes in kind. The granary's location near the river underscores the importance of agricultural surplus and trade in sustaining the city. Craft production thrived in Mohenjo-daro. Evidence of workshops for beadmaking, metallurgy, pottery, and shell ornamentation appears throughout the site. Artisans fashioned elegant bangles from faience and carnelian beads that glowed a deep red. Copper and bronze tools show signs of skilled casting and forging. Seals carved from steatite depict animals, unicorns, bulls, elephants, alongside enigmatic signs that represent a script yet to be deciphered. Merchants may have used these seals to mark goods in trade. The presence of weights and measures standardized across sites indicates a system of regulation and fairness. Imagining the hum of these workshops, the clatter of tools, the concentration of craftsmen bent over their tasks adds vibrancy to the otherwise silent ruins. Daily life would have been anchored by water. Wells punctuate almost every block. Some are lined with bricks arranged in a self-supporting spiral pattern. Households drew water, carried it in jars, and poured waste into covered drains that channeled it away. In the Great Bath, water may have been ritually pure, perhaps used for ceremonial cleansing. On hot afternoons, it would have offered cool relief. Children likely played in streets, chasing one another around corners, their laughter echoing off brick walls. Women may have gathered at wells to gossip while drawing water. Men might have met in courtyards to discuss trade or farming. The decline of Mohenjo-daro may have been gradual rather than catastrophic. The Indus River is capricious, shifting its course across the plain. Each time it flooded, silt deposited layers that required rebuilding. Over time, the effort to raise streets and repair buildings may have overwhelmed the population. Combined with changes in climate and trade networks, life in the city became unsustainable. When people left, they likely moved to smaller villages or towns, carrying their knowledge with them. Over centuries, the abandoned bricks collapsed and were buried. When archaeologists arrived in the 1920s, local farmers guided them to mounds of baked brick. When the bricks were removed, the city emerged. The stillness that pervades Mohenjo-daro today belies the thousands of lives lived there. Walking through the site, you may pick up a potsherd and feel its rough surface. This shard might have belonged to a bowl that held lentils, or milk, or water. Each object evokes daily gestures, hands kneading dough, feet padding across floors, bodies bathing in the Great Bath. The wonder of Mohenjo-daro lies not in grand monuments, but in the accumulated traces of everyday life that still whisper through its bricks. Coricancha's importance lay not only in its architecture, but in its role as the axis of the Inca universe. The temple served as the starting point for Sekline's imaginary lines radiating outwards across the landscape to more than 300 huacas, shrines, including springs, rocks, caves, and mountains. These lines organized ritual visits and offerings linking the capital to the distant provinces. By walking these lines, priests and pilgrims mapped the empire spiritually, reaffirming connections between humans, the natural world, and the divine. The temple also functioned as an astronomical observatory. Windows and niches were aligned to capture the light of solstices and equinoxes. When the June solstice sun rose, its rays illuminated the central golden disk of Inti inside the shrine, linking the heavenly journey of the sun to the ritual life of the Inca. During the festival of Inti Raymi, which marked the winter solstice, the Sapa Inca emerged from Coricancha in solemn procession. Dressed in brilliant garments, he carried gold effigies of ancestral mummies and led priests, nobles, and dancers through the streets. They offered corn beer to the rising sun, recited prayers, and burned llama fat and incense. The festival lasted 9 days, with music, dancing, and athletic contests. At night, fires burned on the surrounding hills, and the plaza filled with people singing to the gods. Such festivals reaffirmed social bonds and cosmological order. When Spanish priests appropriated Coricancha, they attempted to efface its significance by building their church on top. Yet earthquakes in 1650 and 1950 damaged the colonial structures, revealing the resilience of Inca walls. In the 20th century, restoration efforts uncovered some of the original rooms, such as the Temple of the Sun with its curved wall and trapezoidal window, and the Temple of the Moon with a window that frames the Pleiades. Visiting today, you walk through spaces where Spanish masonry meets Inca stone. In one room, you see a colonial oil painting hung on a wall built by Inca masons. The juxtaposition is striking. Outside, the courtyard features a garden with replicas of golden maize. Stones still bear the marks where sheets of gold were once pegged. A sense of layered history permeates the space. The presence of Coricancha extends beyond its physical remains. Cusco itself was designed in the shape of a puma, with Coricancha at its heart. Modern Cusqueños still honor the site. On the solstices and equinoxes, crowds gather near the convent of Santo Domingo to watch the first rays of sunlight. Quechua ceremonies include prayers to Inti and Pachamama. Street festivals incorporate dances that recall Inca mythology. The site thus remains a living temple in cultural memory. To sit quietly near its walls, to run your fingers over their perfectly fitted joints, is to feel an echo of the Inca's profound connection to earth and sky. This feeling can linger even after you open your eyes and return to your own room. The hum of the world outside your window may seem to carry with it the rhythm of Inca chants, the feel of cool stone, and the warmth of the sun rising over the Andes. In the soft boundlessness before history begins, there is a murmur in the air. It is not a voice in the ordinary sense, but a feeling like distant thunder rolling somewhere beyond the horizon of memory. Through this twilight we drift toward the ancient wonders that no longer exist, toward the places where time piled stone upon stone and human hands shaped myths into architecture. This is not a summoning, but a remembering, a quiet reverie where the names of vanished marvels surface like constellations appearing one by one in a darkening sky. On the island of Pharos, where the warm Mediterranean poured itself into the busy harbor of Alexandria, there once rose a tower that felt like a needle stitching sea and sky together. You can imagine approaching it by boat, your oars dipping into turquoise water while the scent of salt and tar mingles with the fragrance of exotic spices carried on the breeze from inland markets. The tower itself grows out of the horizon slowly, first as a smudge, then as a pale line, and then as a gleaming column against the blue. It was over 400 feet high, built around 2,300 years ago under the watchful ambition of Ptolemaic kings. Its base was square, its middle octagonal, and its upper tier cylindrical, each tier narrowing as if ascending through the orders of the world. At the summit stood a statue of a sea god, perhaps Poseidon, gazing out over an endless expanse. A polished bronze mirror faced the sun, collecting light and casting it across the waves, so that even in the haze of midday, sailors could find their way. At night, fires burned behind stone walls, and the glow spilled through openings, the flames fed by fuel carried up in baskets by men climbing internal ramps. When you imagine the lighthouse in operation, you hear the crackle of the fire, the hiss of burning oil, and the soft murmurs of guardians tending to it. You feel the cool stone beneath your palm as you stand within, leaning against a wall as the tower hums from the wind. For more than 14 centuries it stood, weathering storms and earthquakes, a constant sentinel for a city that thrived on knowledge and trade. Eventually, the earth shook harder than it had before, and cracks opened in the structure. Stones fell into the harbor. Pigeons took roosts in the hollow spaces. By the 14th and 15th centuries, it had collapsed, its stones reclaimed by the sea. Divers in our own time have pulled massive granite blocks and statues from the water where the tower once stood, evidence of a world that used to be above the waves. In the quiet of night, when the harbor is still and the moonlight drifts over water, there is a whisper of firelight on dark waves, a memory of the lighthouse's long pulse. Leaving Pharos slowly, our imagination travels along the coast of Asia Minor, where Halicarnassus, now called Bodrum, sits under sun and sea breeze. There is no imposing structure there now that hints at what once stood on the site, but 2,375 years ago, a tomb rose from the earth like a stone mountain. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, built in 350 BC for the ruler Mausolus and commissioned by his sister and wife Artemisia, mingled cultures in its very stones. Greek architects designed it, Egyptian, Lycians, and Carian artists carved its faces. The tomb towered over 140 feet high, and atop its stepped pyramid was a marble chariot drawn by horses, carrying the figures of Mausolus and Artemisia into the heavens. Sunlight fell on the friezes that wrapped around its base, each depicting mythic battles. Greeks against Amazons, centaurs against Lapiths, a dance of struggle that mirrored the journey of the soul. Imagine walking along polished steps, your hand brushing smooth stone carved with floral motifs. Feel the change in temperature as you move from the sun into the shade of colonnades. Hear the rustle of leaves in an olive grove nearby, the song of a nightingale, and somewhere within the tomb, the echo of voices speaking in a language now lost. For centuries the mausoleum stood, enduring the trembling ground, but eventually the land itself shifted. Earthquakes cracked its pillars, stones tumbled. By the medieval period, the mausoleum had become a quarry. Crusaders took its marble to build the castle of St. Peter across the bay. Now only the foundations remain, and fragments of sculptures lie in museums far away. Yet, when you sit in the stillness of a Bodrum evening, with the taste of figs and the scent of myrtle in the air, you can almost feel the weight of that lost tomb pressing up from the soil like a buried memory, asking to be remembered. Night deepens, and we wander west to the land of Ionia, to the banks of the Cayster River, where the Temple of Artemis once stood at Ephesus. Twice the size of the Parthenon, this temple rose on a marshy site, chosen so the building would not be shaken by earthquakes. Imagine approaching it under a canopy of stars, the soft light of torches illuminating rows of towering marble columns, each reflecting moonlight like polished bone. The air is rich with the scent of incense and crushed bay leaves. Pilgrims whisper prayers to Artemis, goddess of the hunt and of the moon, their words lingering in the colonnade like smoke. The temple had been built and rebuilt across centuries. In the Bronze Age, there was already a sanctuary. Later, around the 4th century BC, artisans erected a structure of extraordinary scale. More than 100 marble columns supported a roof that seemed to float. Sculptures of Amazons and mythic scenes adorned its pediments. In 356 BC, according to ancient writers, a man named Herostratus set fire to the temple to immortalize his own name. Flames licked the carved cedar beams, and the sanctuary collapsed into ash. Alexander the Great was born the same night. In time, the temple was rebuilt, larger and more ornate, a sanctuary that drew people from across the Mediterranean. But centuries later, as new religions rose and empires changed, the temple's gods were declared obsolete. By 391 AD, under Emperor Theodosius I, the temple was closed, and soon after, it was torn down. Its stones were used to build other structures. Its columns were repurposed. Today, only one reconstructed column stands in a marsh, rising from reeds like a ghostly finger pointing skyward. Yet the idea of the temple continues to bloom in the imagination. In the quiet between breaths, you can hear the prayers murmured at its altar, the soft tapping of sandals on marble, and the rustling of deer in the woods beyond. As the night unfolds, we sail to the island of Rhodes. Here, after repelling an invading army around 305 BC, the citizens decided to melt down the abandoned bronze weapons and use them for something magnificent. They cast a statue to honor Helios, the sun god. The statue would come to be known as the Colossus of Rhodes. Completed in 282 BC, it stood more than 100 feet tall, roughly the height of a modern 10-story building. Picture the process. Workers forging large bronze plates, their hammers ringing out under the island's sun, an iron framework rising in segments, ropes creaking as winches lift metal pieces into place. They filled the statue's base with stone to stabilize it, anchoring the god to earth. Ancient artists later imagined him straddling the harbor, his legs apart so ships could sail beneath. Modern archaeologists think he stood inland on a platform, perhaps overlooking the harbor rather than astride it. Either way, the figure glimmered with the early light, a beacon of civic pride. Only 54 years after its completion, an earthquake shook Rhodes. The Colossus fell, bronze limbs breaking with a sound like thunder. The ruins were so impressive that travelers still came to see them for centuries. Pliny the Elder wrote that few could wrap their arms around the statue's thumb. Eventually, traders purchased the bronze and carried it away as scrap. The exact location of any remaining pieces remains a mystery. Yet if you stand on the harbor today and close your eyes, you can still feel the phantom warmth of the sun on the bronze, hear the hum of bees around thyme flowers, and sense the pride of an island that once raised a giant to the sky. In the sacred grove at Olympia, within the Peloponnese, there once sat a figure so awe-inspiring that ancient writers claimed it inspired fear. The statue of Zeus at Olympia, carved by the sculptor Phidias around 435 BC, was more than 40 feet tall. Made of wood but overlaid with ivory and sheets of gold, the statue depicted Zeus seated on a throne of ebony and ivory, holding a scepter topped with an eagle in one hand and a figure of Nike in the other. Precious stones glinted from his clothing. Imagine the temple where this statue resided, the flicker of oil lamps casting moving shadows across carved pediments, the scent of burnt offerings, the murmurs of visitors approaching with reverence. The statue filled the temple so completely that, according to one account, if Zeus stood up, he would tear the roof off. For centuries, the statue presided over the Olympic Games. But as Rome adopted Christianity and pagan worship was suppressed, the temple was closed. Some sources claim that the statue was moved to Constantinople and later perished in a fire in 475 AD. Others suggest it may have been destroyed earlier. Whatever its fate, the majestic figure is gone. At Olympia today, only broken columns and a reconstructed column of the temple remain. Cicadas sing in nearby olive trees, their song rising in waves like memory, and the space where Zeus once sat now fills with sunlight and drifting dust. Yet the image of the god, serene and terrible, endures in the mind's eye. Further east along the Euphrates, we drift into the realm of myth and debate. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are perhaps the most elusive of the ancient wonders, and the one that may never have existed at Babylon at all. In traditional stories, Nebuchadnezzar II built the gardens around 600 BC for his Median queen to remind her of the green mountains of her homeland. Terraces rose like a staircase planted with trees and flowers, irrigated by ingenious hydraulic systems lifting water from the river. Ancient historians describe the gardens as if writing about paradise, shady groves suspended above the earth, exotic animals wandering among lush foliage. Yet archaeologists excavating the ruins of Babylon have never found definitive evidence of such a structure. Some scholars propose that the gardens were actually located not in Babylon but in Nineveh, built a century earlier by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Reliefs from his palace depict terraced gardens and aqueducts. Whether the gardens were real or an imaginative compilation of travelers' tales, their image has hovered at the edge of history for millennia. Think of a place where water flows up rather than down, where palms and pomegranates hang over stone balustrades, where the air is cool even under a Mesopotamian sun. Imagine standing among cascading vines, hearing the trickle of water and the call of distant birds, smelling jasmine and myrrh, feeling the dampness of moss underfoot. Then imagine that memory dissolving, leaving behind only the desert wind and the shifting sands. The gardens are a symbol of foreign beauty, of engineering married to nature, and of the elusive nature of memory itself. Not far from the supposed site of the Hanging Gardens lies a city that did exist, a city that is so central to ancient myth and theology that its absence is like a missing tooth in the mouth of history. Jerusalem, perched on a high plateau between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea, was once anchored by a temple that represented the nexus of heaven and earth. According to tradition, Solomon built the first temple around the 10th century BCE after his father David brought the Ark of the Covenant to the city. This structure became a house for the Ark, a permanent home where sacred rituals could take place. The site was on Mount Moriah, the same place where, in earlier tradition, Abraham had been prepared to sacrifice his son. The temple served as a focal point for sacrifices, pilgrimage, and economic activity. Over time, the first temple was destroyed, and a second was erected by exiles returning in 515 BCE. Later still, Herod's renovation created an even more splendid complex beginning around 1909 BCE. It remained under construction until its destruction. The temple, in all its iterations, was a place where worship was formalized. It was built as a series of courts, each delimiting who could enter. The outer court welcomed anyone. The inner court was for Judeans. Deeper still was the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could enter once a year. In 70 CE, after a revolt against Roman occupation, the Roman army breached Jerusalem's walls. Fires raged, stones cracked. Herod's magnificent temple, still being decorated, was destroyed. With its fall, a world ended. Rituals that once centered on sacrifices at the temple were transferred into synagogues. Practices such as blowing the shofar and waving the lulav during Sukkot were adapted to new spaces. Now only portions of the retaining wall remain, a single exposed surface known as the Western Wall. Pilgrims still place slips of paper with prayers between its stones, their fingers brushing limestone smoothed by centuries. In the quiet of the night, standing in front of those stones, you might feel vibrations not from the present, but from voices long gone, reciting psalms in Hebrew and Aramaic. From Jerusalem, our night journey meanders deeper into Mesopotamia, to an edifice that may have inspired myths of towers reaching the heavens. On the dusty plain near the ancient city of Ur in modern-day Iraq, there once rose a structure of baked bricks known as the Ziggurat of Ur. Built around 2100 BC by King Ur-Nammu, this stepped pyramid honored the moon god Nana. Its base was rectangular, and terraces ascended in receding layers, possibly 7 in total, symbolizing the cosmic order. Climbing its steep ramps in your mind, you feel the roughness of brick beneath bare feet, the heat radiating from sun-baked clay. The ziggurat served as a physical link between earth and heaven. Priests ascended to offer sacrifices and observations. For centuries, the structure held its form, but winds and rains eroded its surface. Enemies sacked the site, bricks crumbled, and were repurposed. Later kings, like Nabonidus in the 6th century BCE, repaired sections of the ziggurat, but time wore it down. Modern archaeological excavations have revealed only 4 levels remaining, and the stones that once supported the upper levels are gone. Biblical scholars see in its ruins echoes of the Tower of Babel story. Standing near the remains today, you can look out over the desert and imagine the ziggurat rising again, its terraces alive with priests carrying offerings, its summit bathed in moonlight as the sound of a reed flute floats on the breeze. Our dream path leads across the ocean to a high, dry plateau in southern Peru. Here, etched into the desert floor, hundreds of lines and shapes stretch across a tawny expanse. Between 500 BCE and 500 CE, people from the Paracas, Nazca, and Tiahuanaco cultures removed dark stones to reveal lighter sediment below, creating designs that only truly come into view from above. Some depict animals, a spider, a hummingbird, a monkey. Others geometric shapes, spirals, and straight lines that run for miles. Walking beside one of these lines at night, you see only a shallow trench, a simple groove in the earth. But if you rise in your imagination above the desert, you see the figures stretch out like pages of an enormous book. The purpose of the Nazca lines remains uncertain. They may have been offerings to deities, pathways for ritual processions, astronomical calendars mapping the movement of stars, or some combination. Theories about alien visitors and messages to the heavens abound, but remain outside the empirical realm. In 1994, the lines were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Though they still exist, the meaning that gave rise to them has vanished. The creators are gone, their culture assimilated or lost. At night, the desert air grows cold, and the only sounds are the whispers of wind moving fine sand. The geoglyphs lie silent, waiting for the dawn. Their endurance reminds us that even when a structure persists physically, its context, its living purpose, can disappear and leave us with a beautiful, inscrutable relic. There is another ruin across the oceans, in the heartland of North America, that hints at a vanished society. Near present-day Collinsville, Illinois, a great city once thrived between the 9th and 14th centuries CE. The people who built it erected large earthen mounds, the largest of which, called Monk's Mound, covers 14 acres and rises 100 feet into the sky. This was Cahokia. Imagine walking through its precincts at dawn when smoke from hearths curls upward and the smell of roasting corn fills the air. Children's laughter floats over the fields. Traders arrive carrying shells, copper, and hides. The mounds served ceremonial and residential purposes, housing chiefs and perhaps connecting the earth to the cosmos. Cahokia flourished through agriculture and long-distance trade. Then, around 1400 CE, the population declined. Environmental changes, resource depletion, social unrest, no single cause explains its fall completely. The mounds remained, covered with grass and trees, and European settlers later built farms nearby, often unaware that they trod on ancient earthworks. Today, the site is a UNESCO World Heritage location, preserved as a reminder of the engineering and cultural sophistication of the Mississippian peoples. Under starlight, you can stand atop Monk's Mound and feel the cool soil underfoot. The night breeze carries the scent of clover and faraway rivers. The stars wheel overhead. The city's houses and palisades have vanished, but the earth remembers the hands that shaped it. Turning east again, we arrive at the city of Nineveh. Situated on the banks of the Tigris River in what is today northern Iraq, Nineveh was once the glittering capital of the Assyrian Empire. Settlement of the region began around 6000 BCE, and the city grew to prominence as a trade hub connecting Mesopotamia with Anatolia, Persia, Egypt, and Arabia. Ancient streets would have been filled with merchants, trading tin, textiles, ivory, and spices. In the palace of Ashurbanipal, scribes amassed a vast library of clay tablets containing literary works like the Epic of Gilgamesh, legal documents, astronomical observations, and tax records. The smell of baked brick hung in the air. The sound of scribes pressing cuneiform signs into clay tablets echoed from courtyards. Nineveh stood as a symbol of imperial might until 612 BCE, when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes besieged it. Fires consumed palaces, statues toppled, the city was plundered. For centuries, the once great capital lay buried beneath mounds, its memory lingering only in scripture and legend. Excavations in the 19th century revealed its walls and palaces. Now, if you walk among the ruins at dusk, you see tumbled stones and the remains of bas-reliefs. A shepherd might pass with goats, his footsteps soft on the dust. The Tigris flows quietly nearby. The library's tablets, once carefully stored, are scattered in museums around the world. Nineveh's greatness is a memory told by whispering reeds along the river, by the faint scent of baked clay when the sun warms the earth, by the glint of an ancient brick half buried in the soil. Moving northwards to the steppe of central Mongolia, there is a legend of a tomb hidden so well that it has never been found. In 1227, the great Khan of the Mongols, Genghis, died, and according to folklore, his body was carried to his homeland for burial. The funeral procession is said to have killed everyone they met to keep the location secret. It is said that a river was diverted over the burial site to conceal it permanently. Tribal guardians were tasked with keeping the site hidden, perhaps near Birken Kaldon, a mountain the Khan considered sacred. Today, archaeologists still debate whether the tomb exists, and if so, where. Expeditions have used satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and even treasure-hunting drones, but politics and respect for local customs have limited exploration. Imagine wandering over rolling grasslands under an immense sky. The smell of sagebrush and wildflowers mixes with the scent of horses. The wind whistles through the grasses, and a hawk circles overhead. Somewhere beneath the earth, perhaps, lies a chamber containing the remains of a man who united the steppes and set in motion events that reshaped continents. The absence of evidence has become its own kind of presence. The tomb's unknown location is an object of fascination, a reminder that some stories remain out of reach, hidden intentionally by those who created them. We cross back across continents to Egypt, to a city that rivaled Athens in intellect and Rome in splendor, Alexandria. Here, within the precinct of the Mausoleum, or seat of the Muses, the Ptolemaic dynasty founded a library around 283 BC. Scholars believe it held hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, a collection unmatched in the ancient world. Walking into this library in our imagination, we feel cool marble underfoot and hear the dry rasp of papyrus unfurled. The smell of ink and reed pens fills the air. Scholars from Assyria, Greece, Persia, Egypt, and India work here, translating, copying, and commenting. Outside, in a courtyard with colonnades, philosophers debate under the shade of vines. The library's end is shrouded in conflicting stories. Julius Caesar, while pursuing Pompey in 48 BC, ordered the burning of ships in Alexandria's harbor. The fire spread and may have burned parts of the library. Later, around 391 AD, the Temple of Serapis was converted into a church, and the daughter library stored there may have been destroyed. Still another account blames the Muslim general who captured the city in 640 AD, though the story was recorded centuries later and may reflect polemic rather than fact. It seems likely that no single event burned the library completely. Rather, sections were lost at different times. What remains clear is that the library's collection dwindled, its scholars dispersed, and knowledge that had been gathered with such effort was scattered. The Royal Library and its daughter library vanished. Today, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands as a modern homage to that ancient institution, its sleek disc shape echoing a rising sun. Still, there is a sense in which the original library persists, not in bricks or scrolls, but in the idea that human curiosity can be gathered and nurtured in a single place. In the quiet of evening, walking along the Corniche with the Mediterranean stretching into darkness, you might sense the ghost of the old library, a whisper of papyrus and the rustling of pages, a faint echo of a scribe's sigh as he copies a text by flickering light. Another wonder that has vanished is found at the heart of Athens. In antiquity, on the Acropolis, a giant statue of Athena made of gold and ivory once dominated the Parthenon's interior. This statue, known as Athena Parthenos, was created by Phidias in the 5th century BCE. It stood nearly 40 feet high, depicting the goddess fully armed, holding a statue of Nike in her hand. The gleam of gold from her armor and the ivory of her skin reflected the light of oil lamps. When visitors entered the temple, they would have been met with an overwhelming sense of presence, a goddess filling the space. Over time, the statue was removed, perhaps taken to Constantinople, and disappeared. Only Roman copies and descriptions survive. The Parthenon itself, later converted into a church and then a mosque, was severely damaged in 1687 when a Venetian bombardment ignited an Ottoman powder magazine inside. The explosion destroyed much of the sculpture. Standing on the Acropolis now, amid columns that still reach toward the sky, you can imagine the statue rising up again in the center, its spear gleaming. You can feel the texture of worn marble under your fingers and hear, faintly, the voices of worshippers chanting hymns to Athena as the wind whistles, through open spaces where walls once stood. From here, our reverie turns east and inland into the mountains of Lebanon, where the Romans built a sanctuary that seemed determined to rival the gods themselves. Imagine ascending a wide staircase carved into a platform of colossal stones, each block the size of a small house. The sun overhead is bright, casting sharp shadows, and a cool breeze carries the resinous scent of cedar through the air. Before you rises the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, sometimes called Heliopolis in antiquity, a complex begun under the Seleucids and expanded by Roman emperors. Its main temple measured 88 by 48 meters and was encircled by 54 Corinthian columns that stood nearly 20 meters tall. Each fluted shaft was carved from a single stone and crowned by capitals adorned with acanthus leaves. The entablature they supported weighed tens of tons. Standing beneath these columns, you feel dwarfed not only by their height, but by the ambition behind them. The sound of your footsteps echoes off paving stones. Doves coo from the recesses of the portico. When the temple was new, priests offered sacrifices on a great altar as crowds looked on from a courtyard. Incense smoke rose toward the sky, and prayers were murmured to Jupiter, Baal, and other deities. Over centuries, the temple underwent many changes. In the early 6th century, a chronicler remembered a lightning strike that toppled parts of the building around 524 or 525 CE. Later, Emperor Justinian ordered the removal of granite columns to embellish other monuments. Some sources believe they were incorporated into Hagia Sophia. Crusaders turned the vast complex into a fortress, building walls between columns and piercing them with arrow slits. Earthquakes shook the Bekaa Valley. In 1759, tremors brought down most of the remaining pillars, leaving only 6 of the original 54 standing in a row against the blue sky. Today, when you stand among the ruins, you hear the wind whisper between empty flutes of stone and the far-off bleat of goats grazing on nearby terraces. Grass sprouts from the cracks, fallen capitals lie like overturned goblets. Tourists speak softly, their voices hushed by the scale of what remains. Night here is cool. The stars are sharp points above the columns, and in the silence you may imagine the hum of ancient prayers and the rumble of the earthquake that toppled the god's house. Beyond Baalbek, across the Syrian desert, our thoughts drift to an oasis that was once the jewel of caravan routes linking the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. Palmyra rises from the mirages with its colonnaded streets and arches, its limestone glowing rose in the setting sun. Walk with me along a dusty avenue lined with tall columns. Their surfaces bear carved reliefs of camels, palm trees, and divinities. The city's heart was the Temple of Bel, dedicated in 32 CE to the Mesopotamian god Bel or Baal. Picture its sacred precinct, a grand doorway leads into a vast courtyard enclosed by a wall. Within stands a cella surrounded by a colonnade of Ionic columns. Priests move in and out, their footsteps soft on flagstones. Incense rises, heavy with the fragrance of frankincense and myrrh. The temple was not static. In the Byzantine era, its walls echoed with Christian hymns as the cella was converted into a church. When Arab armies swept through in the 7th century, the structure became a mosque around 1132, with a mihrab carved into one wall and a minaret added. Worshippers murmured prayers in Arabic. These layers of belief protected the temple for centuries, even as sandstorms scoured its stones. Then, in August 2015, a new kind of violence shook Palmyra. Extremists set explosives inside the cella and reduced much of the temple to rubble. Only a single wall and an arch remained standing, and broken columns lay scattered across the courtyard. Antiquities scholar Khalid al-Assad, who had devoted his life to Palmyra, was executed nearby for refusing to reveal hidden treasures. The destruction was an assault not only on stone, but on memory and identity. After the city was retaken, archaeologists spoke of using anastylosis to reconstruct the temple, but debates continue about whether reconstruction erases the scar of loss or heals it. As you stand among the ruins today, sand stinging your cheeks and the desert wind keening through openings where a roof once stretched, you might catch the faintest echo of all the prayers ever uttered here: Aramaic invocations, Greek hymns, Christian psalms, Arabic verses, and feel grief for a beauty intentionally shattered. Continuing eastward along the ancient Silk Road, we ascend into the high valleys of Afghanistan, where rugged cliffs of yellow-brown sandstone guard secrets carved 1,500 years ago. In the Bamiyan Valley, along the walls of a cliff, artisans of the Kushan and later Hephthalite periods carved two enormous standing Buddhas around the 6th century CE. One stood 38 meters high and the other 55 meters. They were not just statues, but cliff sanctuaries. Monks carved niches, galleries, and caves all around them. From afar, the statues looked like they stepped out of the rock, draped in flowing robes that once were painted in vivid colors. As you approach in this reverie, you feel the cool shade of the cliff. Your hand grazes gritty sandstone. The smell of dust and juniper fills the air. The larger Buddha's face was serene, its eyes lowered in contemplation. The smaller radiated warmth, as if welcoming travelers along the Silk Road. Birds nested in the crevices around them. Pilgrims circumambulated at their feet. The sound of chanting echoed through the valley. Over centuries, the statues watched dynasties rise and fall, religions intermingle, and local communities graze their sheep in the fields below. In March 2001, the world witnessed in horror as the Taliban government declared the statues idolatrous and spent 25 days reducing them to rubble with dynamite and artillery. The explosions reverberated through the valley. Dust billowed. Fragments of carved rock tumbled down. The niches now gape empty, but emptiness does not mean absence. Standing before the voids, you sense a presence that is almost more powerful because it is invisible. The valley's cliffs are riddled with other caves, some containing murals of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and others still used by farmers to store grain. UNESCO designates the entire valley as a World Heritage Site, a place of outstanding universal value that reflects the interchange of Indian, Hellenistic, Roman, and Sasanian influences. The destruction of the Buddhas shook the world, but the valley remains sacred ground. In the silence that descends after the wind dies down, you might hear the call of cranes overhead, or the rustle of barley in the fields, and imagine the subtle smile that once graced a stone face, now turned to dust. Our journey carries us farther along the arc of the ancient world to a river plain that birthed one of humanity's first cities. The Indus River flows sluggishly through a landscape of heat and glittering water. Under the soil lie baked bricks laid out in a grid 5,000 years ago. At Mohenjo-daro, a metropolis built entirely of mud brick, the streets are so straight that you could stand at one end and see the sunlight glint on the far horizon. Imagine walking on these brick roads between walls that once rose 2 stories high, running your fingers along their sun-warmed surface. The city flourished from about 2500 to 1500 BCE. There was an acropolis on a raised mound, perhaps serving as administrative and ceremonial center, and a lower town arranged on a strict grid with drainage channels and wells. The Great Bath, a sunken rectangular pool lined with bricks and bitumen, glints with water. You hear the splash of someone stepping into it and the slosh as they wash off the day's heat. In nearby buildings, you catch whispers of deliberations by council members or priests. The smell of baked bread drifts from ovens. Merchants call out prices in a language we cannot decipher because the Indus script remains undeciphered. Each house has its own private well, a mark of civic planning. The drains run beneath the streets, covered by stones you can lift to clean. Potters shape elegant jars, bead makers string carnelian into necklaces, farmers bring cotton and sesame seeds to the market. This was a city humming with life, yet there are no colossal statues or grand palaces. Its wonders lie in the mundane made marvelous: an organized grid, a system of sewage, a public bath. The decline of Mohenjo-daro remains mysterious. Rising water tables and salt action now threaten the mud brick foundations. Hydrologist Robert L. Rakes argued in the 1960s that repeated floods of the Indus River overwhelmed the city. Silt deposited by the river may have gradually engulfed houses and fields. Climate change around 2230 BC brought aridity. A shift in the river's course could have stranded ports far inland. Trade with Mesopotamia declined. Whatever the cause, people left, and the city was abandoned. Today, archaeologists have excavated only about 1/3 of Mohenjo-daro. When you walk among the eroded walls under a burning sun, the air buzzing with insects, you feel how fragile bricks are in the face of time. There is a stillness broken only by the occasional call of a peacock or the crunch of brick dust underfoot. As your shadow lengthens across the ancient streets, you think of the generations who lived here and wonder what stories their silence could tell. Finally, we cross the oceans and the heights of the Andes to reach Cusco, the navel of the world for the Inca. In this high valley, stone walls curve like the contours of mountains, each block shaped to fit its neighbors without mortar. Within the city stood a place the Incas considered the axis of their empire, a temple complex called Coricancha, or Coricancha, meaning golden enclosure. It was dedicated to Inti, the sun god, and built under the ruler Viracocha, and later embellished by Pachacuti. Entering the precinct in our imagination, we pass through a doorway framed in polished andesite and find ourselves in a courtyard surrounded by low walls, each lined with sheets of gold. The air is thin at this altitude. Sunlight is intense, causing the gold to glow warmly. There were separate shrines within the enclosure for the moon, stars, thunder, and the rainbow. Priests tended gardens planted with golden maize and llamas. At certain festivals, the mummies of past Inca rulers were brought out to bask in the sun, their faces painted and adorned with feathers. The scent of burning Palo Santo and chicha beer being brewed fills the air. Musicians play flutes, dancers step rhythmically on the stone courtyard. The entire complex hums with energy. All around, the walls are built of stones so precisely cut that you cannot insert a knife blade between them. They tilt slightly inward, making them earthquake-resistant. The Spanish conquest brought sudden change. Conquistadors entered Cusco in the 1530s, seized the temple's gold, and divided it among themselves. The complex was dismantled, and over its foundation, the church and convent of Santo Domingo were erected in the 17th century. Chaque, parts of the Inca walls remain, supporting Spanish arches and bell towers. When you stand in the convent today, you can place your hand on smooth Inca masonry and rough colonial plaster in the same gesture. You feel the coolness of stone, the warmth of sunlight streaming through a window, and perhaps the weight of two histories stacked atop one another. The Inca believed Coricancha was the center of the world, the point from which Seke lines radiated outwards to sacred sites across the empire. That central axis still exists in memory and in the way Cusco's streets lead inward. At dusk, when the Andean sky shifts from deep blue to indigo, you can imagine golden sheets glimmering again, reflecting the last light, and you may hear the faint footfalls of priests walking to the shrine of the sun. Before we leave the Americas altogether, there is one more vanished temple that rises in our nocturnal memory. Across high mountains and deep forests to the north of the Inca realm lay another magnificent city built on water, Tenochtitlan. Where now stands the sprawling metropolis of Mexico City, there once gleamed an island city on Lake Texcoco. Canals crisscross the urban grid. Chinampa gardens floated like green rafts. 3 long causeways connected the city to the mainland. In the center of Tenochtitlan stood the Templo Mayor, a stepped pyramid with twin sanctuaries at its top, dedicated respectively to Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, and Tlaloc, god of rain and agriculture. The base of the pyramid was roughly the size of a city block. A broad staircase led up its face. Serpents carved in stone flanked the balustrades, their open mouths seeming to devour those who ascended. Throughout the 15th century, Mexica rulers enlarged the Templo Mayor repeatedly, encasing older structures within newer, larger ones. Each rebuilding corresponded with major political events, such as victories or dynastic successions. Imagine the sound of drums and trumpets as laborers hauled volcanic stone from quarries, mixing mortar, carving sculptures. Craftsmen in feather workshops created vibrant mosaic shields and headdresses to be offered. During great festivals, processions wound through the city, carrying effigies of gods, bundles of sacred objects, and baskets of flowers. On the pyramid's summit, priests burned copal resin. They offered maize dough, cacao, and sometimes human hearts to feed the deities. The rituals of blood and sacrifice were not acts of cruelty, but of cosmological necessity. The Mexica believed the gods had given their own blood to create the world, and human offerings reciprocated that gift. The smell of incense and blood mingled with the scent of water and earth. The sun rose each day over the volcanoes, and life continued because the balance of the cosmos was maintained. From atop the pyramid, one could see across the lake to snow-capped mountains, over a sea of rooftops and waterways. Market plazas below buzzed with trade: cotton, cacao, obsidian knives, jade, and gold. The city's grid aligned with the cardinal directions, reflecting a cosmic order mirrored in the temple itself. The dual shrines on the summit embodied complementary forces, dry and wet, war and fertility, and the space between them served as a liminal zone where offerings were made. Every element of the architecture carried meaning. Serpent heads at the stairfoot reminded of the myth of Coatepec, where Huitzilopochtli vanquished his sister Coyolxauhqui. Carved frogs on Tlaloc's side evoked rain and abundance. Paint pigments, bright blues and reds, gleamed in sunlight. Banners fluttered. At night, fires burned on the altars, reflecting in the lake below like stars. The Templo Mayor's end came with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors. After months of siege, famine, and disease, Hernán Cortés and his allies captured Tenochtitlan in 1521. In the aftermath, the victors dismantled the Mexica temples and palaces, using the stones to build churches and administrative buildings. The Templo Mayor was razed, its twin shrines toppled. On its site, the Spanish erected a cathedral to St. Mary of the Assumption. Over time, the lake was drained, the canals filled, and the island city transformed into a colonial capital. The exact location of the Templo Mayor faded from memory. For centuries, people walked across the plaza above its buried remains, unknowing. Indigenous traditions remembered the temple in song and ceremony, but the physical structure disappeared beneath layers of new construction. In 1978, a piece of the Templo Mayor resurfaced. Electrical workers digging near the cathedral struck a massive circular stone. When archaeologists examined it, they saw the moon goddess Coyolxauhqui dismembered, her limbs splayed, carved in high relief. Excavations followed. Layer by layer, archaeologists peeled back colonial floors to reveal the buried pyramid stages. Sculptures emerged of serpents, frogs, skulls, and deities. Offerings of obsidian blades and shells lay in stone boxes. Stairways still bore traces of red and blue pigment. Today, visitors can walk along elevated paths through the excavated site while the cathedral looms above. The juxtaposition of the colonial bell towers and the pre-Hispanic walls is stark. You might stand on a platform where a priest once offered copal and flowers to Tlaloc and look up at the carved Baroque facades of the cathedral, hearing organ music mingle with the imagined beat of huhuetl drums. The smell of street vendors cooking maize on griddles drifts across, bells ring, pigeons flutter. The Templo Mayor is gone, yet it persists in these overlapping sensations, in the stories told by elders, in the murals painted on city walls, and in the scholarly work that reconstructs its significance. Its absence is a presence, a reminder that monumental structures can vanish, but their imprint endures in collective memory. From Greece, our mind drifts across the sea again to Carthage. On the Iaios Byrsa hill overlooking the harbor, there stood temples and palaces of a great Phoenician city. Carthage was founded by colonists from Tyre in the 9th century BCE and grew into a maritime power. Its temples were dedicated to deities like Baal-Hamon and Tanit. The architecture of Carthage is largely lost because Rome razed the city in 146 BCE after the Third Punic War. Flames consumed its temples, walls were torn down, the ground was plowed with salt, according to legend. A Roman colony later rose on the site, but Phoenician Carthage was gone. Today, scattered columns and the ruins of baths remain. In the quiet of the Carthaginian evening, as the sun sets over the Mediterranean and gulls cry overhead, the scent of jasmine and seaweed drifts up the hill. You might hear the echo of Carthaginian sailors singing as they hauled ships into dry dock, or the murmur of priests in temples long vanished. Southward from the Mediterranean, across deserts and savannas, there lies another ruin that speaks to the ebb and flow of power and memory. In the rolling hills of southern Africa, near modern Zimbabwe's Masvingo province, stand the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe. Approaching the site, you traverse grassy plains dotted with acacia trees and granite outcrops. The air is warm and dry, cicadas buzz, the smell of wood smoke drifts from distant villages. As you climb toward the ruins, the first thing you notice is the way the walls blend with the landscape. They are built from local granite, their color shifting with light from pale gray in the morning to ochre at sunset. In places, the walls rise more than 10 meters, curving gracefully along the contours of the hills. The Shona people who built this complex between the 11th and 15th centuries did so without mortar, fitting stones together like a vast puzzle. The name Zimbabwe, from a Shona word, has been translated as houses of stone or judicial center, hinting at both the material and the social function. The settlement at Great Zimbabwe comprised multiple areas. On a rocky hill stood the Hill Ruin, the oldest part of the site, dating from around 1250. Here, a natural cave served as a sacred shrine. The ruler and his family lived nearby. 30-foot-high walls encircled terraces and towers. Down below, on more level ground, spreads the great enclosure, a massive walled oval completed around 1450. Within its outer wall, a smaller inner wall creates a narrow passageway that leads toward a tall, conical tower. Moving through the tight corridor, you brush your fingers along stone blocks smoothed by centuries of human touch. The air cools, sounds from outside bird calls, the rustle of grass fade. Emerging into the inner yard, you see the conical tower rising like a beehive. Some interpret it as a granary, symbolizing the ruler's ability to feed his people. Others see it as a symbol of authority. Whatever its exact function, the tower's shape and smooth masonry evoke both power and abundance. Near the great enclosure are valley ruins that include hundreds of clay houses, hearths, and storage platforms. Archaeologists estimate that at its peak, Great Zimbabwe may have housed up to 20,000 people. Life here pulsed with activity. In the morning, women tended millet and sorghum fields, men herded cattle, children fetched water from nearby streams. Smoke curled from cooking fires, the smell of maize porridge and roasting meat filled the air. In stone enclosures, artisans worked copper and iron, smelting ore in clay furnaces, hammering tools, and casting ornaments. Excavations have revealed porcelain shards from China, glass beads from Southeast Asia, and copper ingots from kingdoms along the Zambezi River. These artifacts indicate that Great Zimbabwe was part of a network of trade connecting interior Africa to the Indian Ocean. Caravans would carry gold mined in the region to the port of Sofala, where dhows bound for Kilwa and Cairo awaited. In return came cotton cloth, beads, and luxury goods. The soundscape of the city would have included the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic pounding of grain on grinding stones, the clang of metal on anvils, and the voices of traders haggling in the market. At night, drums and mbira thumb pianos played. People sang songs honoring ancestors and telling histories. The stone walls themselves were more than utilitarian. Their curves and courses created a sense of movement and enclosure. Some scholars suggest the walls were built to delineate sacred spaces rather than to defend against attack. Indeed, the walls have openings and interruptions that would make them ineffective as fortifications. As you walk along the top of a wall, you see that the stones are laid in courses, each slightly offset from the one below, creating patterns that catch the light. In places, chevron designs appear, formed by carefully angled stones. Birds and small mammals dart in and out of gaps. The stones feel warm in the afternoon sun and cool at night. Sitting atop the wall, you can look out over rolling hills dotted with baobab trees. If you close your eyes, you might imagine the hum of voices discussing lineage, rites, and rituals, the invocation of ancestors, the whispered council of elders. You might smell the earthy scent of stored grain and fermented beer. You might taste the slightly sour flavor of sorghum porridge eaten with pumpkin leaves. Despite its achievements and connectivity, Great Zimbabwe's prominence faded around 1500. The reasons remain debated. Some scholars point to environmental factors such as droughts and soil exhaustion. Others suggest political struggles over succession or the rise of competing centers. Whatever the causes, the population declined. Buildings fell into disrepair. People moved to other settlements. By the time European explorers heard rumors of a stone city in the interior, Great Zimbabwe was largely abandoned. In the 19th century, European antiquarians visited the ruins and, influenced by colonial attitudes, attributed them to foreign builders rather than to the Shona. Later research corrected this narrative, emphasizing indigenous ingenuity. During the colonial era, the site was plundered. Stone blocks were taken for building. Soapstone sculptures were removed. In the 20th century, after Zimbabwe gained independence, Great Zimbabwe became a powerful symbol of national identity. Its image appears on banknotes and the national flag. Ceremonies honoring ancestors are held there. Tourists walk the same paths once trodden by Shona rulers. Their voices echo among the stones. Guides tell stories of the site's past. The click of camera shutters punctuates the narrative. In the quiet moments between tours, birds sing from thorn trees. A lizard scurries across the stone. The wind sighs through grass. Great Zimbabwe reminds us that monumental architecture exists in Africa, not only along the Nile, but also deep in the interior, and that the rise and fall of cities is a global pattern. As the sun sets over the ruins, shadows lengthen across the walls. Warm light bathes the granite, and the stones glow as if lit from within. The smell of drying grass and cow dung fires drifts on the wind. A herd of cattle moves across the plain, bells ringing, a shepherd calls. His voice echoes off stone. Darkness comes quickly in the tropics, and soon the ruins are silhouetted against a sky bright with stars. The Milky Way arches overhead, mirrored by the curved walls below. Fireflies wink on and off among the grasses. Standing in the great enclosure at night, you feel both the protection of the walls and the openness of the sky above. The conical tower looms like a sleeping sentinel. In the silence, you might hear the faint rustle of spirits, the ancestors of those who built and lived here, moving among the stones. Their stories, though fragmented, still resonate. The wonder of Great Zimbabwe persists not because of what remains, but because of the lives, trade, music, and rituals embedded in its stones, and because its absence from mainstream narratives for so long now invites us to expand our understanding of the world's wonders. There are wonders that were once written in wood and thatch rather than stone, wonders whose absence is total because organic materials seldom survive millennia. On the lush islands of Polynesia, elaborate houses of meeting and ritual once stood, each adorned with carvings and sacred objects. They have not endured in physical form, but the traditions they housed live on in songs and dances. The intangible can be a wonder too, and its disappearance can be as real as the fall of a marble column. Consider also the wooden palisades and earthworks of the Hopewell culture in North America, or the raised fields and causeways of the Aztec Chinampas, wonders of agriculture that sustained cities and have since been submerged or built over. In the Amazon, there is evidence of geoglyphs and intentionally planted forests that speak to a landscape shaped by human hands and now returned to rainforest. These wonders challenge us to think about what it means for something to be lost. Is it gone when its materials decay, or only when its meaning is forgotten? In the soft darkness, such questions hover like fireflies. When we consider the wonders made of wood, earth, and fiber, we also sense the breath of those who built them. A meeting house on a Polynesian island is not only a structure of poles and thatch, it is a repository of genealogies, chants, and cosmology. Its carvings are genealogical charts in wood, its rafters the ribs of an ancestral whale, its floor a communal bed where stories are exchanged and decisions made. Imagine sitting inside such a house at night. Palm fronds whisper in the wind outside. The scent of coconut oil and kava permeates the air. Elders recite myths of voyaging canoes, finding islands by following stars. Young children fall asleep listening to these words. Though the house may rot and collapse, its pattern of relationships persists in the community that gathers and the songs that recall its form. When a new house is built, builders consult memory and spirit as much as engineering. The wonder here is not a monument, but a practice, living and dying with each generation. The same is true for the wooden palisades of the Hopewell or the earthen lines of the geoglyphs in the Amazon. Raised fields and causeways in the jungle permitted agriculture in flooded terrain. Geoglyphs carved into forest clearings created shapes seen only by spirits or by those who flew in dreams. These works have mostly vanished under regrown rainforest, but their traces remain in soil patterns and botanical diversity. Scientists can read them in satellite images and pollen records. Indigenous peoples read them in the stories of ancestors who taught how to farm in harmony with seasonal floods and droughts. To lie in your bed at night, hearing the rain outside, and imagine a vast network of raised beds woven between rivers is to feel how intimately human survival has always been tied to understanding land and water. These agricultural wonders remind us that not all monuments are built in stone. Some are carved into living landscapes and into collective memory. Memory itself is a construction. Our brains arrange impressions, sensations, and stories into structures. When we say that a wonder is lost, what do we mean? Does it vanish because we can no longer see or touch it? Or does it persist because we continue to speak about it and to imagine its form? In many languages, memory and imagination share a root. To remember is to make present again. The stories we have wandered through tonight of temples, statues, gardens, libraries, pyramids, mounds, shrines are made present in your mind as you listen. You may never have traveled to any of these places, yet through words you feel the grain of a stone column under your palm, smell incense in a dark hall, taste dates sold in a market. The mind is itself a kind of temple where these sensations take shape. When the physical temples fall, the mental temples can still be rebuilt. And when we share memories with others, we enlarge the spaces within which these wonders can live. Destruction, too, is part of the story. Fires burn libraries, earthquakes topple columns, floods submerge fields, invaders repurpose stones. Such acts can be violent, deliberate attempts to erase a culture or impersonal natural disasters indifferent to human meaning. Yet even destruction can be generative. The stones of the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus form part of a castle that still stands. The materials of the Temple of Artemis support a church. The site of the Templo Mayor now holds a cathedral. The house of a Polynesian chief becomes mulch that nourishes coconut palms. When something is broken, its pieces do not disappear. They simply take on new forms. In this sense, every wonder participates in cycles of transformation. To acknowledge this is not to diminish loss, but to recognize continuity. The process of creating and uncreating, of building and dismantling, is itself a wonder. As you lie in the dark, perhaps you feel your own body as part of this continuum. Your bones are minerals borrowed from the earth. Your breath is air that has passed through countless other lungs. Your blood carries iron forged in ancient stars. Listening to stories of lost temples and statues, you may sense your heart rate slow, your muscles relax, your mind opening like a flower at night. The images of distant ruins blend with the shadows in your room. The rustle of your sheets becomes the wind over a desolate plain. The hum of an appliance becomes insects in a marsh. The ticking of a clock becomes footsteps on stone. In this half-awake state, boundaries soften. Past and present, dream and reality overlap. The purpose of these stories is not only to inform, but to create a space where waking thought and sleeping imagination can mingle. In that space, you are free to wander and to rest. Consider the wonder of language itself. Words are sounds and marks that link minds across time and space. Homeric bards recited epics for hours on end, their voices carrying tales of gods and heroes. Buddhist monks memorized sutras and passed them down for centuries before they were written. Indigenous storytellers encode history and environmental knowledge in narrative and song. Without writing, without stone, these wonders persist through repetition and care. When you listen to this script, you partake in an oral tradition, albeit mediated by modern technology. The cadence of the narrator, the pauses between sentences, the recurring images, all are part of an intangible architecture built for you. This architecture can collapse if neglected. Languages can die when speakers vanish. Songs can be forgotten. Yet new stories and languages also arise. The wonder of communication is ever renewable. Perhaps then, what truly distinguishes wonder is not its scale or its materials, but the quality of attention it commands. A small shrine tucked under a rock can be as wondrous as a colossal statue if it concentrates meaning and awe. An act of kindness can be a wonder, a bridge between people. A seed sprouting after lying dormant for centuries in a desert jar is a wonder. A memory of your grandmother telling you a story by candlelight is a wonder. The world is full of such moments. They often go unnoticed because they do not announce themselves with thunder or marble, but if you slow down and listen, they reveal themselves. Part of the intention behind this journey through ancient wonders is to encourage such attention. By moving slowly, describing textures and smells, we attune ourselves to details. By contemplating ruins, we become aware of time and mortality, and therefore of the preciousness of the present. The wonders we have visited tonight span continents and millennia. They include temples and tombs, libraries and lines in the desert, mounds of earth, and cities on lakes. Some were built to honor gods, others to house the dead, still others to control water or to gather knowledge. All required imagination and labor. All eventually passed away or were transformed. Their stories remind us that humans everywhere have sought to shape the world in response to cosmic beliefs, environmental challenges, and social needs. These efforts continue. New wonders are being constructed: skyscrapers, particle accelerators, digital networks, and they too will one day be ruins or myths. Awareness of this cycle can be both sobering and comforting. Sobering because it underscores impermanence. Comforting because it situates us within a grand tapestry of making and unmaking. Lying here at the end of this nocturnal journey, you may feel a gentle exhaustion, the kind that comes after a day of travel when you have seen many places and heard many stories. Your mind may wander back to a particular image, the glimmer of a golden sheet in Cusco, the curve of a wall at Great Zimbabwe, the sound of rain on raised fields, the flicker of a torch in a dark passage. Let these images settle like sediment in a calm lake. They will form layers within you, strata of memory and dream. You may recall them in the future, or they may sink into unconsciousness, but they will have shaped you. This is what wonders do. They leave impressions. Even when they no longer exist in the world, they exist in those who have imagined them. And so, as you close your eyes, know that you carry within you a small echo of temples and statues, gardens and towers, oracles and libraries. Their stories will accompany you into sleep and perhaps into your dreams. As the night deepens, our journey winds back to places we have already visited, weaving connections among them. In Alexandria's harbor, stones from the fallen lighthouse lie underwater alongside coral and fish. At Bodrum, fragments of the mausoleum are displayed behind glass in a unwind museum, their carved lines smoothed by time. In the British Museum, sculptures from Halicarnassus and Ephesus stand beneath bright lights, far from the Anatolian air. The only column of the Temple of Artemis rises among reeds, its reflection trembling in a pool where frogs croak. At Rhodes, there is talk of building a modern Colossus, a tribute to the old, but the original lives only in imagination. Olympia's ruins bask under the midday sun and then fall into cool shade. Visitors walk among them, their whispers blending with the chirring of cicadas. Babylon's desert wind covers and uncovers bricks, playing with the idea of the hanging gardens. Jerusalem's western wall is worn smooth by centuries of fingertips. Ur's ziggurat stands as a jagged outline against the morning sky, its bricks warm and smelling of earth. The Nazca lines remain, but the stories behind their shapes have drifted into silence. Cahokia's mounds rise, and children run down their slopes, unaware of the city that once pulsed there. Nineveh's walls have collapsed. Shepherds graze their flocks where kings once proclaimed laws. The tomb of Genghis Khan remains hidden, and the steppe grass sways above it like waves. The Library of Alexandria's scrolls have turned to dust, but words within them survive in quotations, in translations, in fragments preserved by accident. Athena Parthenos glows in reproductions. Carthage's salt is gone, but the city's memory endures in Latin literature and in the patterns of modern Tunis's streets. All of these losses are not only physical, they are emotional. They remind us that nothing lasts forever, and yet they show us that memory persists even when stone does not. The narrative arcs through these memories like a river through a canyon, slowly eroding, revealing layers. There are common threads: ambition, devotion, beauty, destruction. Each wonder rose because people had a vision of transcending the ordinary. They gathered resources, organized labor, and chiseled stone. They made something bigger than themselves. For a while, these wonders did what they were meant to do. They guided sailors, honored the dead, glorified gods, celebrated victories, kept knowledge safe, connected communities to the divine. Then, forces beyond the control of their builders intervened. Earthquakes shook towers and temples, fires consumed libraries, invaders toppled statues, floods and droughts forced migrations. New religions declared old shrines irrelevant. Time itself, patient and relentless, cracked stone and weathered wood. Yet each wonder also had caretakers who tried to preserve or repurpose them. Crusaders used mausoleum stones to fortify their castle. Herod's renovation of the Second Temple attempted to magnify it. Nabonidus repaired the ziggurat. The daughters of Babylon's scribes moved scrolls to safe places. The Minoans rebuilt their palace after earthquakes. Preservation and destruction existed side by side. This interplay is part of the story, a reminder that nothing is simply lost or simply saved. As the hours pass, the mind's eye wanders through corridors lit by torchlight. You can feel the gritty texture of carved stone beneath your fingers in the mausoleum, the way it warms under the sun. You can hear the echo of footfalls on marble in the Temple of Artemis, the soft slap of sandals, and the whisper of prayers. In the lighthouse, the wind moans as it flows through narrow slits, and the air smells of smoke. At the Colossus, there is the tang of bronze and the creaking of ropes, the call of gulls, and the laughter of children who look up in amazement. At Olympia, the scent of olive oil and sweat mixes with the smell of fresh reeds, and the rustle of laurel wreaths brushes ears. In Babylon, there is the trickle of water from aqueducts, the chirp of birds nesting in hanging vines, and the distant murmur of market vendors. In Jerusalem's temple, you hear the shofar's blast, the whisper of linen robes, the murmur of Torah verses. At Ur, there is the crunch of gravel underfoot on the ramp to the ziggurat, the distant howl of desert wind, and the faint bleat of sheep. In Peru, there is the rustle of wind across desert flats, the call of a condor, and the soft scratching of a stick clearing stones. At Cahokia, the low thud of feet on packed earth resonates through mounds, while frogs croak in wetland ponds. In Nineveh, scribes blow gently on wet clay to dry their inscriptions. The smell of baked bread drifts across markets. On the Mongolian steppe, horses snort in the cold air, and the wind plays in the horsehair on bows of fiddles. In the library, pages rustle, conversations murmur in multiple tongues, and the smell of melted wax lingers. Each sensory detail is like a bead on a string, linked to others in a chain of memory that stretches far back and also extends into your own present experience as you lie in bed, listening. Perhaps what draws us to these lost wonders is not just their size or their splendor, but the stories embedded within them. The lighthouse was built so sailors could find their way, a practical purpose that became a symbol of guidance. The mausoleum was an act of love and a statement of power, mixing art and architecture to immortalize a ruler and his spouse. The Temple of Artemis reflected the wealth and piety of a city, and the devotion to a goddess associated with wildness and childbirth. The Colossus was a response to victory and a thank offering to a god of the sun, made from the weapons of a defeated enemy. The statue of Zeus embodied religious belief and artistic innovation, giving the intangible concept of a deity a physical form that inspired awe. The Hanging Gardens, real or not, expressed nostalgia and the ability to shape nature into artifice, blending engineering and love. The Temple of Jerusalem symbolized covenant and community, a place where heaven touched earth. The Ziggurat of Ur united cosmos and city. The Nazca lines connected earth and sky through lines. Cahokia's mounds encoded social hierarchy and cosmic order. Nineveh's library was a repository of human thought. Genghis Khan's tomb is a testament to secrecy and respect for the dead. The Library of Alexandria represented the human drive to gather and preserve knowledge. Each story contains smaller stories, artisans working by lamplight, priests chanting, sailors steering by a light, children running in courtyards, scribes bending over tablets, kings contemplating immortality. These wonders are not just objects. They are human experiences, layered over centuries. In the slow flow of narrative, we find ourselves thinking about what it means to remember. Memory is not static. It is more like a current that flows through time, carrying fragments of the past forward. It is possible that the Hanging Gardens never existed in Babylon, yet the image persists because people told each other about them, drew them, wrote poems about them. It is likely that multiple fires and neglect destroyed the Library of Alexandria, yet the library continues as an archetype of lost knowledge. The Temple of Artemis is gone, but its sculptures draw millions to museums, and its location is still a place of pilgrimage for the imagination. Ruined stones of the Mausoleum found new forms in a castle that still stands. The Colossus fell, but the Statue of Liberty borrows its imagery of a colossal figure greeting ships. The Ziggurat inspired biblical tales. The temple in Jerusalem lives on in liturgy and in the architecture of synagogues and churches. The idea of lost wonders touches something fundamental in us, the awareness that we are part of a stream much larger than ourselves, that beauty fades but leaves echoes, that endings are also beginnings. Toward the end of our night journey, the pace slows. The scenes we have visited fade in and out like lantern light seen through fog. We are no longer moving rapidly from one wonder to another, but lingering, letting images settle like dust on stone. In this quiet, we return to the title theme, the ancient wonders that no longer exist. Their absence invites stillness. In the dark, you can feel the weight of the ages pressing gently, not oppressively, but reassuringly, like the hand of a parent on a child's back. You are connected to a long chain of people who have gazed up at towers, walked through colonnades, sat in the shade of massive statues, and wondered what lies beyond human life. The wonders are gone, but the desire to create, to honor, to remember remains. New wonders will replace them, and someday those too will vanish. And yet, as long as there are storytellers and listeners, the memory of what was will continue, passed on in whispers and dreams. The flames in our imagined scenes burn lower. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their light ancient and calm. The wind that once carried the scent of incense and burning oil now carries only the faint smell of night flowers and cool earth. The stones of the Mausoleum, the temple, the Ziggurat, the Colossus, the library, all settle into the ground, yielding to gravity and time. Even as they do, our minds continue to wander among them, to see in them not just ruins, but symbols of human longing. We breathe in and out, our own rhythm mirroring the rhythm of waves lapping against Alexandria's shore, of wind moving through a colonnade, of time itself unfolding. The wonders that no longer exist might not be visible, but they live in the stories we tell, in the images we conjure, in the feelings they awaken. In the hush before sleep, we let these images drift like leaves on a slow river, watching as they float away into the darkness. Their absence is a presence, their silence a lullaby. Good night.